Okay, I want to I wanted to put in some general things because I I'm working towards making very clear what we're about, I guess, and how people can benefit from what we're about. And one of the big things about Pelham, it is about change. And there's a certain place where that's a value, okay? We believe that change is both necessary and possible. But the other side of that is at times that approach can be a bit too tight, okay? And the sort of introduction I would have put in here really is about looseness. There are a couple of places where Pelham's no approach is perfect. And, to use just those words, some of that imperfection is that we are concerned with change, and that can be a bit tight. And it's a bit like not giving teenagers enough room to make mistakes. That's not a particularly good way to parent them. And what I sort of want to introduce here is interesting in terms of today's topic, which is diet. The pandemic is a dire fact in human history, just is. But I want to sort of suggest that in terms of the Pelham tools, and it's true of any tool, we need a certain looseness. I would call it a divine looseness. I think there's a divine irreverence in churches and movements. I feel if you can't have the irreverence, you lose something. If we're taking things too seriously, I think we prevent the growth of depth. Now, we put it simply, we need to be able to laugh at ourselves. And, recognizing David a couple of days, after the anniversary of his death, that was something he really could do, could really laugh at himself. And he could laugh at his mistakes, and his laugh was sort of heavy and then became a chuckle. That's the way I'd describe it. So we need to be able to approach the tools with a certain lightness. We need to be able to play with them. And this part of things almost need to be unsaid, okay? You almost lose something if you talk about the need to be irreverent. It just loses. It's like saying I need to work on my spontaneity, so I'll have half an hour spontaneity at 11 o'clock each morning. It doesn't work. But on the other hand, I think in terms of our overall approach, I think it's useful to bring up, because I think if we can have the looseness and if we can have the irreverence, then we can have the criticism. Then we can have even the rejection, people saying, well, I don't like that, or I don't like what you do. And there's a sort of place for that. And it's something, I guess, that again, perhaps one of my pushes to bring it up here is that it's probably something that's so much easier when we're all in a room together. Okay, someone can kid someone about something. You know, we've got, and seriously, you know, we need to seriously look after each other in a different way. You know, we can't, you know, maybe my joke was off. You know, we could pick that up if we're in a room together. Or someone could find an objection or find a criticism. Because, you know, as we take the work forward, now we take the work forward, what David left us. Yeah, I want to make the most of it, and I think the most of it is being, there's no question about our seriousness, but also at times being able to be light, irreverent. As we come into tonight's topic, which is heavy, because you know, the pandemic is a is a tragedy in human affairs. Almost a tragedy that we don't want to face. I guess the people who want to 2 years ago. I mean, who's ever heard of Dr. Fauci? Okay, you know, he's head of some obscure scientific thing that. But maybe I've never heard of him, or maybe if I have heard of him, as you know, this obscure scientific thing that's about some sort of disease and household word, you know, household name, national treasure, no question. Because we don't want to see those things coming. A bit too scary. And so it's going to have impact on us that we cannot know. And I think it is a place where we can see that power of where we can see the power of memory links. And I feel searching for the right word, the almost strident originality of David Pellin's mind and the strength of his mind. You know, he developed his concept of what we call memory links, which is so, what I've used recently here, is so robust that it's a bit of theory, to use that phrase, in which you can put all sorts of different things. You know, it doesn't have to be about the family within which you grew up and they're all the memory links. It doesn't have to be the culture you grow up with and they're all the memory links. It doesn't have to be, you know, the physical makeup. It can be all of those things. You know, memory links can have a place for the issues around the sort of family someone grew up in, as well as it can have very useful things to say about the time somebody grew up in. You know, someone who was a teenage girl in Warsaw, Poland in 1942, grew up in a very different world than her mum, who was a teenage girl in Warsaw, Poland in 1922. I mean, that's just a time in history that can fit into memory links. And I think it's useful to look at what does something like the COVID coming along, what are the memory links that triggers in people? And as it has progressed, what has been someone's, because it's an odd thing in a way, isn't it? Because it sort of has a beginning and it will have an end. It's a particular sort of, in some ways it's like a war, or like what used to be called the plague, because it begins and then sometimes it does end. So memory links is useful and important. Okay, it comes along, what is it triggering off in me? And as I look back on it, I know what it triggered off in me. I grew up in a happy and secure family. And it really triggered off in me, I'll be okay. Now, they're my memory links going sort of way, way back. I'll be okay. That was what I call my privileged emotional upbringing. And so it triggered off in me, but in my life I have security. It's going to trigger off in somebody else who did not have my privilege. My God, am I going to survive this? Or who is going to be there for me? Or is it going to get me? And initially, I had to be a bit careful to be careful. But then I guess the memory link for me, well, okay, I got a responsibility to handle this because otherwise I'm a burden for my kids, okay? I think there's something that sort of came in like that. When memory links came up, they weren't conscious thoughts. When it came in, I didn't have a conscious thought because I had a happy childhood, I'll survive this. I'm looking back. Yeah, memory links are often what is probably going on with me. And then I guess I move along to, I absolutely know what's going on with me. So I guess wanting my kids to have what I had, I think as a parent, I provided that. I wasn't a perfect parent. Probably all my kids would have said, well, orphanage work came first. But I provided, I think I continued a sort of a sort of nourishing change, generational change that was sort of nourishing, just the same as if someone is in a negative generational chain, that will tend to be perpetuated. Perpetrators of domestic abuse, so often were victims of domestic abuse, that sort of dynamic. So when something like the pandemic comes in, I think memory links, and going back to where the forum started, can provide a quick tool, a lift. This is my likely response to this sort of situation, and this is where it comes from. Then within it, and like war, like some illnesses, some people die and some people don't. Who got COVID and died as a result of COVID. That's, however we look at that particular thing, whether it's the Greek gods or our gods, we will all have different impacts on it. Some people will hit their family terribly hard in a way that will be there forever. Some people, that will not be the case, will go like that. They'll come through it unscathed. And I guess within it, there will be memory links that hold on. There will be memory links that relate to the life forces, okay? They will be there. Someone's, almost mainly into their material life force, they will probably be very selfish. As long as I survive, I don't care what happens to anybody else. I mean, that's the limitation of the material life force. If someone's got that material life force, but if you remember the device, if someone's still got a material life force, but that bit of caring life force and that bit of creativity, then it will be, then that, and this is interesting in terms of memory links, and it's also interesting in terms of the life forces. Because if that is the configuration, that person could be the person who arranges the food banks, okay? Look, I know how to organize, and we can organize that food for everybody. Someone who's got a great deal of material life force, that's not a big deal. The food's there. We just got to find a way to organize and distribute it. And enough performance life force, which will have its own memory links, to be creative. Hey, I could have an idea. And enough performance life force to sell the idea. Enough caring life force to be able to want to help. And then all the material life force becomes a strength because this person knows how to organize. I mean, those of us who have an interest in history, which I do, and I was sort of staggered that, this was a country that could almost on a dime turn their economy around and start producing airplanes and ships in great numbers. That's what happened after Pearl Harbor. 200 airplanes a day, 200 ships a day, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, they couldn't produce these vaccines. They couldn't produce tests. I mean, not only once could America turn out all the ships and planes, they could get them to places. I mean, at one point in the Second World War, Russia, USSR, was full of American Jeeps because they got them there. They got the Jeeps there, and they went some really funny circuitous route. They went on a ship to somewhere, and then they went to the Persian Gulf, and then they went overland. They did it, full of Jeeps. I think it became even a sort of black market for them. There are so many of them. That's material life force. And that's the material life force of American culture, American society. And that was FDR, who had a big hunk of carrying life force. And, the previous guy, he's now called, didn't have a carrying life force. Couldn't turn the country into a powerhouse of testing and vaccinations and manufacture. It's going on a bit of a tangent, but the memory links that will be generated, formed within the pandemic will, for many people, be very, very powerful ones. Now, for some people, they're going to be tragic. It's going to be a struggle to come through them. Someone who lost a mom and a dad, someone who lost a child, someone who got COVID, didn't die, but now has long-term COVID. Long-term COVID's really nasty, really awful. So they're going to be, how is this person who's in the middle, who's gone through this loss? And I guess my work on, my metaphor being a nourishing family. How is the family handling that loss? How is an individual handling that loss? And how that loss is being handled to establish the memory links that are going to be there, okay? And then when people come out of, I sort of need to, I just want to blank off the bottom of this diagram. That one. What are the memory links going to be here? And how are they going to be handled? They're going to be very major. That's the part of within something like COVID, there will be new significant memory links created. Now, some of that is going to be how did what happened in COVID trigger off a person's memory link. It could well have brought in insecurity. It could well have brought in the need for other people, the need not to be on our own, the need to be able to visit family, all those things cut off. That could create negative memory links, and particularly if that relates back to other negative memory links. And I guess the tragedy of COVID, I don't know what the figures are now, but in America, 550, 560 million people. It's hard to say that some of those people who died will have had memory links about hating to be alone. And then when they were dying, they were alone. I mean, that's just a stark fact. And in terms of memory links in this dark situation, the difference between someone who, because of memory links, was okay being on their own. Okay, it's okay for me to be on my own. Someone else, no, I can't be on my own. They're memory links. And, we will never know, but they're the memory links that came into people at the end of their life. I mean, I guess if we're realistic about what the pandemic's been, we've all got to look at death. And to me, because I think this is unique in human history. That's my statement about it. Partly because, it wasn't as bad as the Second World War. It probably wasn't as bad as the Black Death. But there were no bodies in the streets. There were no bomb craters. So it was an odd human trauma, worldwide human trauma and death, invasion that was sort of invisible. You almost walk down any street anywhere. Unless you happen to be, I don't know, next door to a hospital or something. Nothing looked different. And it just didn't. Everything looked ordinary. For some reason, people were wearing masks. But outside of that, the death was not visible the way the death has been visible in other pandemics. The death was not public the way the death had been public in other pandemics or in war or in natural disaster. Even the crisis, the human crisis in the Mediterranean of people from poor countries trying to come into Europe, the death is visible. A little boy's body is washed up on the shore. This had that strange quality of being hidden in some ways. And that in itself will bring up memory links fixed.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting what you just said, because I was sitting here and a couple of things came to my mind. One is, and I agree with everything you said, but then I would have said, except for India now, right? Because there's death in the streets there. Yeah. But just quickly on what you said, because you're asking, what kind of memory links is the pandemic going to produce for us? Probably like a lot of people, and because of this invisibility you're talking about, when it all started getting going, I mean, like everybody else, I was in the process of having to process information. So there's this great threat here, and we're hearing about it, but I don't see it, right? And I did not fall for the, it's all hoax, I didn't. And you know, and I'm pretty rational, and I started doing my digging, my checking, and I thought, yeah, and I've got comorbidities, so I wear the mask and blah blah blah. But the interesting thing is, I have a couple of American friends who now, not sorry, they're Canadians, but they now live in America, and I was in touch with them, and they caught it, and they both became long haulers, and they said, you know, don't mess with this, and these are really good, very good friends of mine, fairly conservative. In theory, you know, they could have been people that said, this is not real, right? But they said, don't mess with this. They're long haulers, and it's taken them months to get through it. And then on top of that, my wife is from Brazil, and we started to hear as this progressed. And quite frankly, and quite sadly, my wife has co-workers who were in 40s and 50s, no comorbidities, went into the hospital dead in 5 days, twice. Yeah. That's people that she knew personally and was attached to. And then there were several who were friends of friends, you know. And so I take what you're saying. There's been this paradox, you know, where's the death? Where's the death, you know? And yet it's there. And so I'll make those observations. I'm not quite sure what else to say. I mean, because you made a good case for us to talk about memory links. And I'll just leave that there at the moment. I think you made a really good point about the invisibility of this. Invisible and yet becoming more visible, just as we probably, hopefully, are getting control of it. It's a paradoxical thing. It's a very paradoxical thing. I think that if I were to say what memory links am I going to have from this, one of them is going to be that exact thing, the paradoxical nature of this. Where's the death? Oh, it's really there. Don't mess with this, you know.
And I think, you know, when I said earlier about having looseness with the tools and being able to be irreverent, I think there are ways that people, here there was, don't know if you remember, help me, Nikki. I think it was Tuesdays at 6, okay? When it first came in. And Tuesdays at 6, everyone would go outside their house and bang on a saucepan, okay? That was, you know, recognizing frontline workers in our health system. That's what it was about. And of course, you go and play a musical instrument, but, you know, a lot of people would just bang on the saucepan. And I think in a way, that is someone going through this terrible thing and finding a way to put in something that's gonna create a positive memory link, okay? You know, how we supported the NHS people, how we supported the frontline workers, essential workers. I think that becomes, you know, it might not be terribly big, might not be a very big circle on the diagram, but it could be a significant positive memory link that someone takes up forward. And I think the danger of, and it's the way, positive memory links tend to make positive memory links, and negative memory links tend to perpetuate negative memory links. So someone who's got a lot of fear in them, say a lot of deep fear in them that, you know, someone's going to be unfair to them. Someone's going to do them in. Someone's going to persecute them. And then they go into a deeper isolation because of COVID. And so there's another Cynthia.
Oh, I didn't need to interrupt your sentence, but this is more on a lighter note. I remember one of an article, and it's kind of true. I'm kind of in the generation Gen X, which is kind of, after the baby boomers and before the millennials, sort of in that in between. And there was an article about it saying, Gen X has been training for this all our lives. We were the ones who had the latchkey and had to let ourselves in and entertain ourselves for hours until our parents came home from work. We actually don't mind the isolation. Although for me, honestly, I've had more social because I have had more social contact through Zoom and the like during, and particularly thanks to Pelin and stuff, than I've had in years. So, so that was an interesting change, and my spouse being home all the time. But yeah, that whole thing about, and just singing all the things that Gen X has been through together that's prepared them for this. Yeah, we don't mind spending hours just entertaining ourselves. That's right up our alley. So
it happened to some of that happened to my youngest son, and I guess he's of that generation, and their two kids. They both had to work at home because they insist in living in London. They got a small apartment. I love London because property prices are, etc. And two small kids. They're pretty tight. Okay. It was hard at times, but Gabe, my son, said to me, I've had connection with my kids I would not have had this not had this. He's very ambitious. He worked for Amazon, all of that. I've got connection with my kids I wouldn't have had. And Bula Rose, my granddaughter, her response was she developed a story about herself. She's 6.5. She developed a story about herself, okay? I can't remember the name. I should know it. But she was Annie, and Annie was abandoned by her parents and was found in the street by her mum and dad and brought into this family. And she insisted acting this out, okay? Gabe from me said, should we be worried about this? Going on for a couple of days. And she's a very imaginative little girl. Developed the whole thing. She sort of had different voice, and it took her a while to get to know them, but they had rescued her because she was abandoned on the street. This whole thing. So, what are the memory links in that family about COVID? And I guess, in terms of memory links, just say memory links in families, that was scratchy. Gabe and Ollie can fight at times, all of that. Her story was embraced, I say with pride, rather than dismissed. Oh, don't worry, I'm busy, be sensible. You could sort of see, embracing a child's creativity rather than squashing it. And you can almost, even as I tell the story, you can almost just see the memory links on the diagram. Because I know they came to visit me, and Gabe was telling me the story, and Tia turned to him and said, Daddy, no, that's just for us. She wanted it contained. She was very clear. so, so at times, memory links is someone who let the positive stuff come through, isn't it? I think it went on for 3 days. And Holly and Gabe were worried about it. It was so vivid. I mean, they liked it, but it was like, should we worry about this? Is our lovely daughter losing her mind? I mean, they didn't go there, and it was sort of a joke when they worried about it. But yeah, how often is a sort of child almost like spring just coming through from nature, from wherever, almost there's no source to it, coming through with something special and having it encouraged or cut off. And, that's a memory link.
I love that approach, which is, what's the expression, not my table, not my restaurant, about COVID. So it's like, this is a terrible oversight. I mean to speak to the manager about this, but in the meantime, here I am with this family. I'll make the best go of it. But it makes total sense to me that the first thing would be to say, this has gone terribly wrong and is not got my name on it.
Yeah.
And who are you again? Like, let's introduce ourselves to each other formally first and see if this can work. There's no arrangement. Yeah.
I guess, relating memory links specifically to COVID, I think what it means, something like that, and it must absolutely be the same in war. Everyone just has a heightened vulnerability. And, a really positive memory link or a triad of positive memory link, because of everything that's surrounding it, is just a tender little plant. It needs to be helped. Like someone who wants to, make the restaurant work, or I don't know, someone who says to their boss in a restaurant, I don't know, maybe we can take hamburgers and make hamburgers and just hand them out on the street. People walk by. People know a hamburger joint. They walk by. We just put them out there for a couple of days. Just say, just totally hypothetical example. And the difference in memory links, I think, for a whole bunch of people, between that by saying, yes, let's do that. How much do you think it's going to cost us? You're the person coming up with the idea. You cost it for me. So that guy goes off and costs it. It's going to cost $175. That's what it's going to cost. We do it. I mean, that would set up a number of sort of really positive memory links. Hey, I was walking by Bernie's the other day. You know what they're doing? They're giving out hamburgers. So I picked one up, but I gave them $10 because then maybe they can do it more often. Rather than someone, coming along and said, have you got any idea how threatened my business is by COVID? There's no way I could consider that. You can almost see because there is at times, I always want to be careful about this, and it is something about the clarity of David's mind, which Vic will remember. There's something almost mechanical about memory links. You can sort of look at a situation and say, yes, there it was there. That's why I think there's something extraordinarily powerful about his diagram about me. There's something quite mechanical. You can say, okay, there's that, and that. And that's going to take you down. And one of the ways in different places we use memory links is in a safe way. It's a way, in a safe way, to give someone a picture of their past. I mean, you know, staying with David for a moment, you know, he set up something so safe. You can hardly take any of his stuff and do something with it that if this was given to a vulnerable person, it's going to hurt them. Vic.
So this is a memory link. You've just triggered a memory for me. I remember an experience in the activator unit. I'll just quickly share with you. Peter, do you remember Sterling Unden? Do you remember Sterling Unden? You might not.
Say again.
Sterling Unden, a person, a male.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. So there was an occasion, like David, and Peter can correct me if I'm wrong, but David was very, very in your face, you know, teaching by emotionally touching you. And sometimes when the discussions, when I look back now and the discussions that happened, he was really the energy, even in a discussion. And on one occasion, this young man named, and I was a young man, you know, this young man named Sterling came in and pretty quickly latched on and was kind of leading a discussion group like in the unit. And I can remember that I remember this. And what Peter just said triggered this memory that I can remember sitting in there and Sterling Unden made a proposition. And I remember David saying something like, I like that, or you're right. This was interesting. And what Sterling said was, learning hurts.
Say again.
Learning hurts.
Yeah, yes, yes.
That implying we don't really learn something unless it hurts us. Now, we could argue and say we learn from happiness, and I would agree. But he was making a point. And I remember distinctly him saying that in this little group, that a discussion group was taking place, and David acknowledging that. And David, in my opinion, didn't often do that. David was the person who was always giving it out, right? He didn't really often say, you're right, you know, that's good, go in that direction. That's how I remember it. And so when I mentioned that, and I'm going to have to leave soon, I apologize, I'm going to have to leave early, but what that brings up to me is maybe one of the things we could all reflect on is what have we been learning through the pandemic? And this is what Peter's getting at, perhaps partly in part. The memory links. What are we learning from the pandemic? One of the things I've learned is the tremendous resilience of my wife. Her patience with me and my foibles has been remarkable. And there's a whole bunch of other things I could go on, but I remember this moment in the activator unit, and it's really amazing to me. Really, quite frankly, to be honest with you, and I've said this before, and I apologize, stuck record, we're talking over half a century ago now. And the memories that come up about being in the unit, seeing David sing, are vivid to me. You know, and this one is one of them, is Sterling Unden, a young guy. And he said, learning hurts. And so that's probably something we could reflect on, is what are we learning through the pandemic? Again, I'll stay for a couple of minutes, listen, and then I'm going to apologize in advance and leave early. I sincerely apologize for that. I'll have to do that sometimes on Sunday. Thank you all.
No, I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think I was there. That strikes a chord. I think I was there. And I knew Sterling really, really well.
Interesting.
He came to Italy when I first opened up Italy.
Oh, I didn't know any of that. Oh,
I knew really well. Lost touch, sadly. But I reckon I was there when that happened. Because the way you told the story, it just sounded really, really familiar.
Isn't that interesting?
My memory.
You triggered mine and I triggered yours.
And linked with yours. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Just to keep, hold on. Thank you. Here's an example of memory links, okay? I don't think I am the only person who, because of COVID, is developing a whole lot of memory links about Amazon packages, okay? Because that just kind of arrived at my door. Yeah, I think I've, and you know, I'm a book collector. So some of my memory links about this time are going to be about books. Yeah, and I guess particular sort of memory links, being on my own, but I have my books. I mean, that's got a particular sort of resonance to it. But they're memory links, and I reckon a whole lot of people are going to have memory links about Amazon and COVID.
I have memory links of, you know, there are these strangenesses about COVID, the paradoxes of being asked to shelter in place, to stay indoors is safest, to only go outdoors if you have to for purposes of, you know, filling your fridge, whatever. And then also somehow being expected to stay healthy. But being asked to, if you're good, you sit there and it's like you're being raised like veal and your mind is going crazy and you're being good. So, but the negative memory links for me is that, well, this is what I do when I'm depressed. And how do I know I'm not? How do I know, working with, you know, addicts, they would say, how do I know I'm not drinking and using? This is exactly what I did was isolate, stay at home, and nobody knew what I was up to, and I could do whatever in secret, and I'm not being of service to others. It's, you know, it's as if I'm using again. So it mimicked a lot of I think the behavior itself brought up a lot of memory links for people. And for me, I had this strange paradoxical thing was that but I wanted to leave the isolation of being indoors. I would go outside. But the only reason I would go outside would be in order to get to, you know, a pub or a restaurant or a movie theater, so I could go inside, you know, for a concert or to visit friends, but inside. And I was kept outside in the cold and told to sit there. And this is how we do it with 6 feet distance. And you can't even talk to anybody when you're standing in line. And I felt like I felt like I was being kept. I was literally on the outside, not on the inside. They wouldn't let me inside. And it felt like a rejection, like I couldn't get warm with other people. So there was more and more reason for me to not go and pick up my coffee. You know, it made me sadder that I couldn't go inside to drink it. And so there are a lot of negative memory links of, the fuck, I'm not going to picnic with people outside in the park. I hate that. I've always hated that, because I wasn't allowed inside with on my father's side. I had to live outside, and I wasn't allowed in the houses. And just live under a tarp or in a tent in the bush. And for me, being safe literally means being warm and rubbing up against other people in subways and the city. City's really important because it's crowded with people, and there weren't enough people out in the streets. So there was a lot of negative memory links that were very confusing to me. And I can better see now, looking back, that I absorbed the impact of this stuff in ways that I didn't overcome. I just really, it felt traumatizing.
I guess memory links can, a time like this can, I guess, reinforce memory links, whether they're good or bad. I think it's a sort of, and if we're not careful, I think, that reinforcement, I imagine for some people, is, hard to control. If it's reinforcing the positive memory link, in a sense, that's what happened to me. Well, I'm fortunate, I'm lucky. But for someone else, it could be absolutely reinforcing negative memories. And I think there's something about something like COVID and the time that's gone on and the threats. Those memory links are going to be pretty strong, pretty indelible. Cynthia?
Well, I was thinking about something that for a lot of it, I get, because normally I don't really watch a lot in English and stuff, but for a while I was getting I talked about being sucked into the YouTube vortex, but I'm thinking now, looking back at it, part of it was kind of a way of protective callousing, because who I was watching mostly were comedians. I was watching comedians about the news, but it reminded me when you talked about Amazon, there was one, it was the Holderness family, and they just made silly skits. That's what they do. They actually get this whole, they actually built a business making silly skits for YouTube. And one of the songs that they make, little parody songs, and one of them, we talked about Amazon. Here comes Amazon, right down Amazon Lane. They come to our house so much, might be our name, and bringing boxes to my wife. And it was this whole cute skit about Amazon. So I think about that every time we think about it's a memory links in a way, but it's a kind of, but I think I did do, and I think, I the only way I could handle the news was filtered through comedians. But I think that might have been kind of, I don't know if it was good or bad, but it might have been kind of a protective callousing in a way.
Can I have a little turn? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. I really enjoyed that. Here comes Amazon. It's like, oh, good, something nice. And this isn't really a memory link. Well, it's going to be, it's all going to become exactly Amazon. The whole world's going to have Amazon-related memory links, aren't we, to do with it? And I don't even use Amazon. I've never sent for anything, but I just remembered this tenant of mine when I was booking her out, whenever that was, in March, and she just happened to say to me chattily, I'm going on a date this evening, and I'm like, what with a stranger? Like, how do you do that in not quite lockdown, but still dangerous? She said, oh no, it's someone I know, and And then she said, all excited, like it seemed like her generation, what's she, 26, I think, all know this thing. She said it as if she had expected me to know. And she said, he works for Amazon. And I looked at her, I went like, what? And she said, he gets tested every week for COVID, right? So if you're going to go on a date, you need to go on a date with someone who works in a job where he gets tested for COVID once a week. Flip me. Just anyway, different. And just the way he gets tested, it's like, I remember the 80s. It's like we're not worried about AIDS anymore, you know, this thing. What I've been thinking about my memory links about the lockdown when it first came. I had sort of a bit the opposite of what Tamara was saying. It's like, you've got to stay in, that's okay, you can do that, it gets really tedious, but you're allowed out to go for a walk, but everybody else is allowed out to go for a walk as well. So my image of it is the streets were just full, just suburban streets where I might go for a little walk and there'd be the odd person normally, packed with people, constantly having to step off the pavement to avoid people. And this is supposed to be, everything just seemed back to front quite a lot. So there was that happening on just the local walk around. And I used to think, well, all these people, obviously they're normally at work all the time when I'm working from home, and they're all shut away in some horrible office somewhere, and I don't never have to bump into them. And then the trying to get, you know, not allowed to go further afield, so then trying just to get to Wimbledon Common, that's my nearest further afield, and then finally working out how to get there, and then that's packed too. And it's just, that's my memory of it. Everywhere I get, I feel like saying normal life, but now it's starting to feel like old life, you know, the previous life, because this is the new normal and it's still ongoing at the moment. And I intend to kind of keep it ongoing, so I don't care. Tomorrow here, there's some new rules come out. You're allowed to do this and that extra. But it's like, why would I do that and risk my life? Yeah, there's just been more people everywhere, because normally I only go to places with people, and if it's to do a specific thing, and then it's really horribly crowded with people, that's how I experience it. And it's like, good, I've done the thing, and now I can get away to not being around packed with people. But now it's like everywhere, it's not packed with people, but everywhere's kind of, or during the lockdowns more, everywhere had, all of those same number of people were more evenly spread out everywhere, I guess, instead of being packed like sardines in places where I would avoid going. They're all just everywhere. So that's my kind of memory of it, just people, and trying to, and my obsession in the first place with, oh, I've got nobody to look after me, I've got to not get it. How do I not get it? That's all I cared about. So, and the things that I had built into my life in recent years deliberately, one little painstaking thing at a time, of things to do, activities to do that are good for me, for my body, like yoga and Pilates and this other thing called Falun Dafa, that was the thing I started with, and it's like, didn't really like doing any of them, but it's like, I can tolerate this one. Oh, good, I can learn how to do that one. That was quite simple. So then I could tolerate going, I could get myself to go. And then I added the other one, and it's like, oh, okay, I can tolerate the first 30 minutes of that, and then the rest of it's tedious, but that's still worth it. Oh, the other one, the Tai Chi, do that sometimes too complicated, but make myself go. Pilates, chair Pilates, I could do that, so that was bearable. That's the only one that I liked, and I'd so painstakingly built these into my life, another one and another one and another one. And then they're suddenly gone, whoosh, just in 1 week like that. And so now I'm back to normal life. I don't know what I'll be like. What will I do? Try and build them back in? Or will I just think, oh, I hate this. Let's just do the one I like when it comes back. I don't know. I suppose I'm starting to look a little bit ahead now to the kind of mystery of what's my new reality going to be like post this year-long new reality that has been. So, yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I don't know what my new memory links are going to be, what effect this will have had. Haven't found out yet. Haven't had the opportunity to try and go to one of these classes and feel like, oh yeah, this is familiar. This is I can do this, or even I might prefer it more, or if it will be like, for goodness sake, how did I make myself endure this? Okay, thank you.
Peter, you're on mute. Peter, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, memory links are forming, okay? Because they just are. Memory links are forming just the same as we're getting old. Days pass. And we absorb our life, and that is what memory links are. Memory links are essentially how we've absorbed our life, how we've handled our life. And I think it's quite fascinating, and I think we got something to offer in terms of memory links by saying, if I've got you correctly, Nikki, we're not going to know what our memory links are going to be after this. It's so strange, such a strange thing. Cynthia.
Sorry, Nikki's sharing reminded me of this. I was watching. It's not really related, but talking about comedians. I was watching Stephen Colbert with my spouse, and one of them, the CDC in the United States has this big chart of the things that you can do that are safe and not safe. And he says, "Yeah, well, it says here now it's safe to do a high intensity workout in a gym." He says, "Well, you can do a high intensity workout in a gym." He said, "Oh, that's great. I couldn't do that before the pandemic."
Yes. I wonder if the fact it's not visible, is there sort of a danger that we'll forget it ever happened, or we'll dismiss it, or we weren't taking the lessons of it. When it was the plague, I mean, I guess every day, the Black Death, people saw dead bodies.
Well,
I think it'd be a real sort of danger. Elizabeth.
You mentioned the plague, and my ears perk up because do enjoy medieval history. We're already seeing something that we've seen in prior pandemics like the plague, which is the employment market is starting to swing towards employees, towards workers again. One thing I've been kind of watching from a distance is the way that the signs are popping up, basically, please come work for us. We can't stay open. And, I've been saying, gosh, if only there was some sort of metric that could be adjusted that would encourage people to give up their time and take risk and put in effort in exchange for some sort of remuneration or bribe or wage. Hopefully something like that could be increased as an incentive. And, you know, so partially because of things like that, you know, the restaurant industry in particular has to change if restaurants want to stay open. But the bigger thing is the kids who spent a year at home, the kids who missed major life celebrations, they're not going to forget this. There's just no way. The memory links they're building are too big and too many. That's my thought.
Yeah. You're right about history, because you know, all sorts of opportunities came up because half the population died. Was a very sort of strange way to look at it. But because it's history, it, you know, has been looked at very clearly. Well, you know, particular studies of particular industries. I think that I think it was the case that, you know, working class people had a chance to have a business in the wool industry, okay, because so many people were wiped out. Do you want to come into it all, Cease?
Well, I'm trying to think what I would say, because actually I kind of enjoyed the last year and a half not working as much and being able to work from home and have friends over. We sit out back in the backyard where I am. We were sitting 6 feet apart or more. And several times a week we got together. And doing things on Zoom. I've kind of enjoyed myself this past year and a half. So, I'm very much aware of all the other horrible things that have happened though too. But yeah. I'm very much aware, and I've had more time to do things like lobbying Congress that I wanted to do, or raising money for Central America, or things that I've wanted to do. I've been able to do it more. And that's been learning some new skills on how to lobby and play back theater. And I think I'm probably in a unique situation with having, you know, my own business and getting Social Security. That helps a lot, that I don't have to worry that I'm old enough to get full retirement. So, but I've been definitely worried about it, and I know it, and I know people who've lost loved ones, and I know how they feel. I went last night to a jam we hadn't had in a year and a half. I play flute, and we play folk music. And this is the first time in a year and a half where we've played together. And it was so much fun. I've forgotten how good it was to all be together. It's much better to play music. You can't do it on Zoom. So there are things like that. I feel, I don't know how, I don't really feel guilty. But I know I haven't suffered like other people. And I'm not wealthy. I just middle class for Florida. So I'm just lucky to be in this position at this time in my life. So, but I'm just very well of the devastation, particularly in the Central American countries we're working with, where it's just completely horrible. So it's.
Thank you. Well, you might be fortunate, but you also put a lot back, Cease.
I can't hear what you said.
You might be fortunate, but you also put a lot back.
Oh, yeah.
Some guy talks about contributions, okay? You make a lot of contributions.
Yes. Yes, I learned that very well there at Pelham, Tom, about contribution. Yeah. And how it contributes to me. I always learn from what I contribute.
Yeah.
It's a gift I give myself.
I think probably one thing we need to keep in mind about this topic, memory links, and sort of fear, you know, from employment or personal fear to political fear. There's probably going to be a whole bunch of sort of hidden negative referrals, memory links. Maybe even some that are hard to talk about. Yeah, what's it? Yeah, just could be. What's it like for someone like Madeleine Albright, who knows about Nazism coming in and watching what's happened, how close it's been? I imagine there'll be a lot of stuff there. And that probably, and maybe it's sort of almost our sort of side of, you know, interests and employment interests, or, you know, our preponderance of the caring life force. You know, maybe it's our sort of people who need to make sure stuff gets talked about and doesn't get buried. I think people's fears need to be talked about and not buried. And, you know, I mean, it doesn't, you know, it hasn't directly affected me, but, you know, some of us have got a confrontation, something like that, mainly caring life force, but you know, a good wedge of material and performance, you know, probably need to encourage people to talk when people go through trauma. You know, the Japanese after the Second World War, the Germans after the Second World War, and the way it was buried and not talked about. Again, it's sort of history. Sort of a bit took out a generation in some ways. I mean, it sort of squashed their creativity or energy. And yeah, how do you know, how does someone talk about, you know, I was so scared all the time? Someone needs to be able to say that. And, you know, it needs to be, I guess, socially acceptable. You know, not just in therapy, but not just in therapy. And I would speculate that when that is not said, you know, like, you know, a teenage kid who's sitting on so much and it's all squashed inside. And when it comes out, he murders somebody. I mean, you know, I've worked with people like that. You've worked with people like that, Cease. And you have, Tamar. Yeah, it's all when it's all squashed inside. And just going back to those sort of situations, you can almost feel someone just sitting on top of this, all these repressed memory links that feels like a bomb ready to go off. And then, you know, there must be a lot of that around. And, you know, going back to Doonesbury for a moment. Yeah, you know, Doonesbury enabled over all these decades, you know, for some of the horrible stuff to be said rather than unsaid in a comic strip, you know, daily comic strip in newspapers. And I guess it's in terms of memory links and COVID, just before we finish, is letting them come out. Or if they're positive ones, well, you know, have some pride in it. If they're negative ones, talk about them. Don't let them fester. And I think it's important we don't forget this happened and is still happening. Yeah. Okay.
I was just thinking that one memory link that will be developing is, I don't think there's, you know, you talked earlier as they were over the crest a bit of the COVID in Britain and America, but I don't think there's been a time where we will actually be dependent on staying safe on countries where it's still really out of control. It's like there's a global effect that's different even from war, which tends to be circumscribed geographically. So I think that...
I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think if I'd done this session, I'm trying to remember now, week, I think, 10 days. If I'd done this session 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think it would have been quite different. Because 10 days ago, I had my second vaccine. Okay? So, and I guess that sort of proves your point, Mary. It's, you know, and I think that's affected me. You know, I've had my second vaccine. I'm safe. And I think the tone probably would have been quite different if I did it, well, particularly 3 weeks ago when I wasn't sure when I was going to get my second one, right? So, you know, I've had one vaccine, but there's this future, and I don't know when. So I think this is, that somehow that fits in with memory links, okay? And the way they did the shots here was very good, appealed to me. There's something about it was very, very democratic here. Okay, so we'll end there. I want to stay on COVID next Sunday, and I want to call it post-COVID, preparing for post-COVID. The Pelham triangle of activity and progress. So I want to go back to the triangle. And yeah, I guess preparing for post-COVID, the triangle, Sunday following that, I think, preparing for post-COVID and the pendulum.
What did you say next Sunday's was about the triangle? What was the second bit? Preparing for post-COVID what?
Triangle of activity and progress.
Oh.
That's what David called it. And I'm in Norfolk, in England. Oops, sorry, help. Sorry, I'm in Norfolk in England, and it's almost quarter to 8. Okay. Do you want to go next, Mary?
Sure. I'm Mary in Rosarito Beach. Apologies, I've been extra quiet today. I had dealing with the shock of my house being close to a wildfire, as well as a lot of exhausting caretakers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I wondered why you were so quiet. Thanks for telling us.
It's a bit much on the lack of sleep and intense caregiving. So. Thanks.
Oh.
Okay, Tamara.
Tamara in San Francisco, 11:37 a.m.
Okay. Elizabeth.
Elizabeth in Eugene, Oregon.
Okay. Cynthia.
Cynthia, Kankakee, Illinois. It's almost 20 to 2 here, and it looks like it's getting a little sunnier from earlier.
Okay. Cease.
Cease, it's 20 to 3, and it is sunny here.
Okay. Nikki.
Nikki, Wimbledon, 7:40 p.m. It stopped raining for a bit. It's going to start again. Apparently, something like the rainiest May on record or something we're in now.
Oh dear. Okay, Wednesday is Examples Day. So I like us to think, because, you know, I want these to be about the Pelham tools, and I want to get them across so ideally they become second nature. You know, they sort of pop up when you need them. And in that sense, I think I don't want it to be restricted to COVID, but if we can think of examples of memory links that are being established through ourselves or people we know, or it could be clients, or it could be just people we're noticing in the world. I think you could, I don't think it'd be hard to find, you know, some of your activities, Cease, particularly young people who, you know, finding a political commitment and developing all sorts of positive links with this time, just as people of a different generation, and of course it's totally documented in books and films, and people develop very positive memory links about being a part of the civil rights movement. Yeah. I mean, if you took the political career of John Lewis, he had the positive memory links. I mean, how do you have positive memory links? Because you're in hospital because you've just been beaten up to the point where you might die. You know, so I guess there are sort of examples of, you know, people who turn the negative into the positive and develop positive memory links coming through crises. Okay, well, thank you. Watch this space. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.